Hi, this is Web3 Talks, the podcast where we learn how to build Web3 projects directly from Web3 founders. My name is Maciej Budkowski and I talk with the founders about their projects, business models, technology, community building, user acquisition strategies, and more. If you want to start your own project or are just curious about the space, this podcast will bring you answers. Stay tuned. Before we start the episode, I'd like to say two things. First of all, if you like this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or whatever service you use. It will help us to reach more people and get more great guests on board. Second thing, if you would like to read or discuss good Web3 content, or maybe you have some suggestions for the podcast, you can join our Web3 Talks Discord channel. You can find the link at twitter.com/Web3Talks, and there's a pinned tweet with the link to the Discord channel. So see you there, and now let's start the episode. Today's guest is Ayyan Rahman, co-founder of Gateway. And this is a service that started as a way to find interesting DAOs, kind of like a Google for DAOs, but it evolved into something bigger. And I'm very happy to have Ayyan today because I've been observing this project almost from its inception, at least from this MVP for sure. So right now, Gateway, its main use case is like a tool for DAOs that help them onboard new contributors. But the second use case that's being under development is building a protocol that will allow people to organize their credentials so they can find effortlessly interesting jobs in the Web3 space. But before we get to that, Ayyan, let's start with the traditional question. How the hell have you ended up in this Web3 space?
Yeah, no, Maciej, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me on the podcast. For anyone that's actually listening, I've been a big fan of what Mac has been able to produce with Web3 Talks. One of the better listens, I would say, when it comes to podcasts and getting educated upon this space. So, Mac, kudos to you, first of all, and thank you for having me here.
Yeah, I feel flattered.
But I think it's always interesting to talk about one's journey into Web3, right? Because you have a whole bunch of different people with their backgrounds who get into the space. You have people who are really experienced Wall Street veterans who may have realized something about the financial systems. And then you have people who are more like myself, who are the anarchist types that are just fresh out of college and decided to actually move into this space and saying, you know what, let's try something different. I think I'm even worse than the latter that I just mentioned because I actually got into crypto back in 2017. So during the whole bull cycle that happened last time around, it was heavy for me in terms of investing with Bitcoin and Ethereum. I'm not afraid of admitting it too. I was one of those people that was just chasing the market. I just wanted to make a quick buck. But then what happened was I got absolutely wrecked. But the thing is, unlike with most financial trends in the past, or I would say financial fads, that is, Bitcoin and Ethereum had a way of sticking around. And this was during a time, I think, especially in 2018, where you saw a lot of people talking about enterprise blockchain solutions, especially the big tech firms like Microsoft, Amazon, et cetera. So it really got my mind grinding around where could we see these applications in our typical industries. So going into college, my first year at Boston College, I decided to take a couple of courses on blockchain. I also was part of the VC club there and the crypto club there. And there's only a few members part of those communities. But within my time there, I had dived really deep into the bridge between traditional finance and decentralized finance. And this was purely after the time of ICOs as well. So what was really interesting to me was figuring out how can you take advantage of the unique abilities to raise capital that crypto had provided, while at the same time being able to do it in a regulatory compliant manner. So when I started thinking about that space, I actually had joined a startup called Liquidity Digital and was actually an intern at the time. The funny story, looking in hindsight now, is I actually was rejected as an intern at this startup initially because, and maybe this goes into why we're building Gateway, this underlying sentiment I've always had. but they were looking for people with X, Y, and Z experience, this many years of understanding of crypto, et cetera. And I was just like, that makes no sense. This is a young industry. This is something that's relatively new. I can understand why you want capital market experience, but at the same time, you need to have innovators. So went from being rejected to just directly contacting the one of the founders of the company, being offered an internship, and then from there being positioned as a head of BD, which I decided at the time to leave school to pursue full time. So left BC, went into working with the startup, and then from there got actively focused on this DeFi side of things, right? We were building the bridge between the two, but what really got me interested was DeFi because of the fact that you were seeing so many markets being replicated in a decentralized manner. You had middlemen being removed from market making. You had middlemen being removed from essentially hedge fund services, from trading platforms, et cetera. So that's when I started investing and heavily getting involved into DAOs like Aave, Uniswap, and Yearn, which at the time when I joined them, these were very, very small communities. And getting that exposure really helped me understand two things: the way that DAOs work, the ways that DeFi protocols actually create talent and get the community involved to like decide on their best strategies moving forward. And then more importantly, the coordination of human capital. Those are the things that really got me interested in the DAO space. So after just investing on my own, I decided to join a VC firm called Visory Capital, help them build out their thesis for 2021, which was focused around the metaverse and also helping them build out their syndicate network, et cetera. But towards the end of 2021, or more so throughout 2021, DAOs was just the hot word, right? I think the thing that a lot of people like to say is 2020 belonged to DeFi, 2021 belonged to NFTs, and now 2022 could be the year of DAOs. And so we hope. But from there, just started to hop back into a lot of these different communities. And it was a complete change since the first time I remember popping into all these different DAOs. And we can touch upon this maybe a little bit later. But what I saw was large communities that were very, very dysfunctional. I felt like there was so much people involved, but there was a lack of clear processes and next steps for one to follow. Onboarding felt like a nightmare. And on top of that, too, it felt like I was taking more initiative on my own without having an understanding of where should I grab onto next, right? So these are things that I think are really important for DAOs to figure out in the future before they can actually become like the future of organizations as many people want them to be.
Okay, thank you for this answer. The thing that you said about DAOs, it's interesting that, at some point of the development of DAO, like it gets pretty hard to organize. Just like normal companies, the bigger they get, the harder it is to run them effectively. I think in DAOs, it's even like, maybe 2x, 3x this effect. So it's because people are not so easily coordinated. And as far as I know, and I know it pretty well, Gateway tries to help to solve that problem. So if you could tell, the story and vision behind the Gateway, like what's the goal of this whole project? And, why have you even started doing that?
Yeah, no, I would love to touch upon that. It's funny too, myself and my other co-founder, so Sanket was going through the same problem of trying to explore these different DAOs and trying to get involved with their projects. And then the other two co-founders, Nuno and Harrison, we actually had come across them via like Seed Club, right? So the idea is like there are very useful communities out there, but what are you doing to actually incentivize or ensure that people are getting recognition for the work they're doing? And on top of that too, how are you ensuring that people can essentially level up internally, right? Like when we think about a traditional company, the steps to actually grow are rather clear, but within a DAO, things are a little bit more open and not in a good way, right? So that's kind of where we started thinking about Gateway, which was initially, okay, let's help people discover these different DAOs, right? So the idea would be you can almost create, like you said, a Google for DAOs and search up these different communities that exist and get a basic education or understanding around like what they're trying to do, what are their goals, what are their missions, and how can you contribute. The problem is with that approach is there's no way that you're actually tackling like the user journey, right? You're not really getting your hands dirty with becoming a contributor yourself. And that was something that we saw is really prominent within the DAO ecosystem, where the DAO space itself is the people behind these communities. We want to make sure that we provided them with like the tools to be able to actually go and join a DAO. But then more importantly, once they join that DAO, where do they go next? How do you level up? what are the work and the value adds that you're providing that makes you irreplaceable? These are the things that I think are going to shape the future of DAOs over the next year or two. Creating these sorts of processes, creating these sorts of metrics, and creating incentivization models for DAOs to be able to track such. So long story short, with Gateway, the vision now is to create like a professional decentralized identity network. That sounds very complex. If I was talking to a VC, I would joke and just use the word Web3 LinkedIn, right? But right now, if I was going to explain to you what we're trying to do, our core infrastructure is currently based off of Ceramic. And anyone that's familiar with Ceramic, they currently are a decentralized storage platform for data. So it allows like users to actually be able to take ownership of their individual like data tables. And then there's ways for you to also associate, like, let's say, a decentralized identifier that's more applicable across multiple different chains as opposed to one singular wallet, right? So you have your MetaMask, which is completely Ethereum. Then you have like your Phantom wallet, which is purely Solana focus, and then like you have your Bitcoin wallets, etc. But what we wanted to do was use DIDs because we think that identity or the work that you do professionally should not be limited to one chain. If everything is about composability, talent itself is composable. It should be able to apply across multiple different ecosystems, industries, etc. So that's why we chose Ceramic. And then from there, the other piece that we're really thinking about is how do we incentivize individuals to create a credential network where they can not only receive credentials from other DAOs, but the community itself can attest to the work that people are doing and verify and validate these sorts of efforts. So the idea would be to like really put the control into a contributor's hands and allow DAOs to find contributors that best fit their vision.
You have like this interesting background. I mean, in a way that on one side you worked in VC and you've seen the crypto in this more ICO time where it was really crazy. So, Ayyan, I would like to ask you, like, how does Gateway really work? I mean, like, I'm a DAO and I say, okay, Ayyan, Gateway is cool. We will use it. So from the user perspective, how does it look like?
No, this is a great question. I think we can look at this from two perspectives. We can look at it first from the DAO's perspective and then from the other perspective, like the contributor or end user's perspective, right? The way that it works right now is the DAO itself, either we do a reach out to them to say, hey, look, this is what we're trying to do. Or if the DAO is interested in what we're building, they can reach out to us as well. Once we've established an understanding around what the DAO is trying to accomplish, what their goals are, where they see the most problems in regards to their processes internally, then we'll create like a DAO space, right? And what we mean by a DAO space is just a page for you on Gateway. So right now, for example, PyDAO was recently onboarded. PyDAO's page was created. There, what the team can do is actually be able to create these different gates. The way that we define gates is these are the quests needed to actually achieve a certain credential. And this credential is currently demonstrated on top of the Gateway platform as a badge, right? With the underlying metadata being stored onto your Ceramic data table. And from that perspective, these DAOs can create these gates, which are, currently you can serve it. Like if you think about the user journey, you can go from something very, very basic, which is educational content and making sure people are understanding what your mission is and what you're building, to like more community engagement focused sorts of gates, which can be like, oh, do you hold our token? Are you interacting with our smart contracts? Have you actually gone and voted and proposed on our snapshot governance? And then from there, like this is like the next step where we're trying to go is get into more like a way to actually help track like individual work that people are doing. So like we're looking to integrate with different like bounty board systems and projects out there. That way we can incorporate that into our offering. And then DAOs can now start also tracking like or managing the user's journey from just being educated individual to now a growing contributor at the DAO, right? So that's the third piece that we're tackling. From the DAO's perspective, they can now, create these multiple different gates. They can also issue out those credentials. We referred to like the reward and contributor credentials earlier. And then from the user's perspective, this is kind of like a little bit more of a fun use case for them is that they can set up their profile on Gateway. They can create like whatever they want. They can attest towards like the experiences they've had in the past. And then what will happen is they can go and access these different gates that these DAOs have created, right? So I can go and find the DAO space that I like the most, do the couple of like different gates that they've enabled. And then that upon completing a gate, those credentials or badges will be directly populated to my profile on Gateway. And once it's been populated, then I can actually like go and have like some sort of proof of work established for my Web3 native resume. Right. So those are like the current things that are capable on the Gateway platform.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. So first of all, the thing that's pretty interesting here is that if you want to onboard people on DAOs and give them like this clear guidance, clear vision, like it kind of resembles, like an RPG game where you have like your character and you have this, tree of your skills and different levels. So it kind of gamifies the whole process, just like it's kind of gamified in big companies. I think it's going to be very important because I've been a member of different DAOs and I kind of didn't find a way to contribute to most of them because it was pretty hard. But also, like, as far as I know, there's another problem here because if there are no clear guidelines which you need to follow, like, okay, if I do this, then I will like level up and get access to other projects and get rewarded more. If you don't have it, then everything relies on people. And people can have some favorite people in the DAO. So, for example, I could be like, the main contributor to the DAO and say, oh, Ayyan, I like you, so you will be one of the main guys in this project, despite the fact that you might not be qualified to this particular task. But the first thing, I like you. And the second thing, I know you. So, it's like I've worked with corporations for many years, like maybe 40, 50 corporations in my whole life. And the problem with them is that it's very hard for people to be noticed because, there are so many people in different departments, different countries and so on that everyone wants to be noticed and not to be lost in this sea of people that's coming there every day. Because until you get noticed, you cannot get promoted because they don't know that you exist, basically. So I'm wondering like how, Gateway tries to solve this problem. I kind of sketched the way I see it, but I'm wondering, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so the way that I would think about it is in three different ideas, right? So I would break it down to three terms. One is focused on the way that hiring works today, which is around like your personal relationships. Oftentimes, companies will hire people that they know. Then you have also branding, which is a big thing in Web2 traditional hiring. And then three is like, how can we do it better in a Web3 native manner? So starting off with like the point that you brought up about like, hey, I know this person. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a bad thing when you're literally hiring someone that has had no experience in the past, right? If we're going to look at like companies, like you got to think about them from like the perspective of, I like to bring it down to sports. So oftentimes you'll hire people that you're most comfortable or have strong relationships with, but you're not just going to hire, let's say, for example, if I'm playing basketball, I'm not going to hire a ballerina, right? I'm going to make sure that I can hire somebody that just because I like that ballerina doesn't mean that they fit, right? I'm going to hire someone that actually makes sense for the role, or I'm going to bring in that player that makes sense for the role. So that's the way I look at relationships and how to improve it. Second piece that I think is really interesting is around branding. I think that we fall victim towards looking at brands as a way of hiring today. For example, like if I saw someone that's graduated from an Ivy League, I think it serves as an initial proof of competency, right? But it's nothing more than that. Just because someone graduated from, let's say, Stanford or Harvard, it doesn't necessarily make them automatically a better developer, right? It's just that these larger companies oftentimes will hire from these schools because of the fact that the proof or the step needed to get into these schools shows that an individual is competent of hard work. They're oftentimes competent of different like languages. They're also able to effectively follow tasks and different procedures. They're really good like doers. So from that perspective, I think hiring is broken because you focus too much on where people are from, what were their previous experiences, etc., as opposed to what their actual merit is and like what they've actually been able to complete. So less hiring. So the key for Web3 would be less hiring based off of, hey, this guy's from FANG or from one of these bigger schools, but more so focus on, hey, what does this guy's GitHub look like? Or what are his social contributions for being a marketer? Like what has he put out there in regards to content? We just need a better way of tracking all these things. And that's where like the Web3 native solution comes.
I think like, in the developer space, it kind of works like that. So people, basically finish some technical challenges and they send their GitHubs and it's closer to this ideal state. But in non-tech roles, like it's total mess. Like you have person who works in, Snapchat or Google or, like Stripe, and people think, okay, if they work there, they must be good fit for my role. But obviously it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and I think that's like to your point, like how's Gateway solving this? What we're thinking of doing right now is allowing people from these different, let's say DAOs themselves, to be able to control the issuance of certain credentials early on. Right now, we're focused on two basic ones. It's contributor credentials as well as reward credentials. One is more focused on like, let's call it like for the lack of better terms, the bounty hunters who are pursuing tasks to do. And then the contributor credential, that's more focused on your actual membership or role within a specific DAO. If you're part of like a design working group or the developers working group, the ops working group or the marketing working group, etc. So once you've received this initial credential, you know automatically it's been verified because it's come from a DAO, right? That's the first step. The second step, as a marketing person, you have a team that you work with. Now, if that team itself, the closest peers of your professional network, are also attesting to your skills, they're validating, for example, I say on my profile that I've done X, Y, and Z, or that I'm actively working on these things. All that will be stored as verified credentials on top of your data table in Ceramic. And then other members of the community can come in and verify that. They can say, yeah, Mac has recorded this podcast. He's written these articles. He's shown these sorts of skills, these sorts of knowledges, and these sorts of attitudes. That validation piece is how we solve for allowing users to take greater control of their professional identity and allowing them to also build up a more meritocratic environment.
I have a question here. As you know, we had some listeners might know we already had Coordinate here, like in this podcast, where they were solving maybe not similar, like kind of similar problem, but with a different tool. So if you could tell us, like, how are you different from Coordinate in that sense? Because I think it will be interesting for people who might, mix you up with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Coordinate, first of all, they have an amazing team. I think some of the people who are involved with that project are very sharp, especially because I have my bias as being someone who was involved with the Yearn community early on. So kudos to the Yearn community to continue to innovate and bring out new tools to the ecosystem. But the first thing that I would mark down in regards to being a main differentiator between ourselves and Coordinate is we're not just limited towards like the ideas of like coordinating like contributions based off of payments, right? So what they're doing is they're helping people essentially evaluate talent and then giving them, for the lack of better terms, they use give tokens, right? So they give them recognition based off of the work that they're doing internally. But what will happen is, and I think this is where the difference really lies, is you need not only to have a validation of the work that you're doing, but you also have to be able to take that and leverage it across other communities, right? So I think the biggest aspect of like the difference between us and Coordinate is around the social side, right? Where you can actually expand these sorts of credentials to be able to be applied across multiple different communities. And also it's more specific towards work you're doing as opposed to like the compensation aspect. So if I was to look at like LinkedIn, for example, for the lack of a better example, the way that I think about it is I can go in there today and say I'm the CEO of Goldman Sachs. Who's going to stop me? No one, right? I can say those things. But in our case, what we want to do is like allow you to like take better control of your social graph. And this is kind of where we've been working with a company called CyberConnect. And what happens is with CyberConnect, you can actually create these decentralized social graphs where users can pick and choose who they want to follow, who are they working closely together with, like being able to connect with other, let's say, contributors in the space. And then you can also start now creating like systems to suggest DAOs based off of your network itself. You can suggest opportunities based off your network itself, right? So our goal is to really start off with solving a problem of onboarding, and then from there going into the overall like talent acquisition marketplace.
This onboarding solution is different in this regard that what are you doing is you kind of try to standardize at least some parts of DAO education. So for example, if I already learn how to use multisig or how to vote and so on, I don't need to learn that in another DAO that I join. I can transfer the skills to the next DAO. That's why I made this RPG game analogy, because your skills are, you can take them with you. So that's just my comment. But I'd like to ask you, like, because you are like maybe half a year old project, something like that, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
But you've already started working with DAOs such as Bankless, Olympus, and Aave. And I'm wondering, how have you managed to onboard such big names to your product?
Yeah, so for us, I think it really comes down to speaking directly to the consumers themselves, right? So for us, our target audience, it's either going after DAOs or going after users. So first of all, it was evaluating which one made more sense. And to us, we looked at DAOs as being the gatekeepers towards the communities themselves, right? The end users. They dictate the way that people will interact with their products. They also dictate the way that people will be able to grow their social recognition within the overall Web3 ecosystem. So for us, it just made sense to go after DAOs first. So once we decided that, the second thing that we had to understand was what really are these DAOs looking for? Like, what are their biggest problems that they're having? And there's no better way to build a service than by talking directly to the people. And the beautiful thing about DAOs is Discord makes it really easy to directly connect and communicate with some of the top leaders within these different communities, right? So with Olympus, we were able to work out to people who are on their operations working group. With Bankless, we did the same thing on the talent acquisition side as well as with the First Quest team. And with Aave, we had reached out to like the grants team and had reached out to some other people who were involved with the project. So it's very easy to get into contact with people, but then from there, it's all about questioning, right? So we started asking a lot of questions around like their processes today, some of their OKRs, understand like where they are trying to go, what are their focuses right now, what are their weaknesses. And then from there, we kind of crafted our product to fit their individual needs at first, right? So if our thought process was, look, if there's these certain problems that people are facing and it's replicable across multiple different DAOs, then we can scale it focusing on Bankless, Olympus, and Aave, and then start reaching out to other DAOs as well, right? So that's kind of been like the process we're in right now with our beta launch is we're working very closely with the communities that we've mentioned above and a couple other groups like Index Coop, as well as the Urine Finance team. But we think that the main focus really has been just talking directly to them and then just having a really strong follow-up process, right? So we're constantly iterating the project. Every single time we have updates, we update them. After we've updated them, then we try to get them like their hands dirty. So we give them access to the platform itself. So it's been a very, very rewarding process.
You said that you have learned about their challenges. So what are the biggest challenges for DAOs right now?
Yeah, without any bias, I will say that onboarding and process is probably the biggest issue that I'm seeing across DAOs right now. Maybe it's wrong of me to say that because I do have the gateway bias, but besides that too, I think there are issues in terms of like talent coordination as well as like incentivization models for DAOs, which is like a deeper conversation that we get into. I always think about like the utopian DAO state and like the problems that DAOs have. So I won't allude to those just yet. Maybe Mac, if you want, we can get into those because I think they're fun conversations to have. But just purely focusing on onboarding, I think the issues that we see right now with onboarding leads to a lot of people kind of leaving DAOs. And then this also false sense of something that's called multi-homing. So for people who are not familiar with Web3 or with DAOs as a whole, what you will have is people who multi-home, which is they go and join multiple different communities and they will contribute to multiple different projects. Think about it from a perspective of being a consultant who can work on many different projects at once, but it's a lot less refined than that. I think the reason that you see so much multi-homing happening today is because of the fact that you don't have clear next steps put into place. You don't have a clear user journey put into place. I think a lot of people want to have ownership and control when they're within a DAO. They want to own their initiatives, but when that's not being translated by the DAO as well, you kind of have people saying, okay, screw it, I'll go from X DAO to Y DAO. And that's something that we have to take into account for before we can start even thinking about creating like a credential marketplace or a network for people to connect. Because if people aren't able to stay at places and if they're not able to actually grow and build out their skill sets, then all of this falls apart.
I think some people are basically doing the same thing as, top engineers in Silicon Valley has done for some time when they were joining multiple startups for some time to just get some equity. And then, they changed to another startup and get some equity. And they were kind of hedging their bets. So as you know, many DAOs are just turning into the zombie towns pretty fast, from the moment they start. I'm wondering if people also, try to basically hedge their bets and make sure that, okay, I will join 5 DAOs and maybe one of them will be something really interesting in the long run.
maybe I'm cynical here, but I doubt that people are looking at the space right now and being like, yeah, you know what, let me join these 5 different DAOs, and whichever one I work for and winds up blowing up, I'll cover my time lost across these other DAOs that didn't turn out, right? So I think that, to your point though, and this is definitely like a concern I have, is people are token hunting right now. And that's kind of like just like a natural progression from being in a bull market, where people are now not just looking, if you can make money without having to invest, why wouldn't you do it, right? And that's kind of like what these different like contributor roles have allowed for bounty hunters to do. So people are joining these different projects and they're making quick money. And then once they've made certain amount of funds, or they are no longer interested in working with the project, they just leave, right? Because there's no sort of like entitlement, or there's no sort of nothing that's really attaching them to a certain organization. So that is a big concern I have. And I would even go further than that in regards to ownership. Token incentive models for contributors are really, really bad, because they oftentimes focus towards like financial output, and they're also like rewarding more so like the early users and the early contributors, as opposed to like new contributors. So like we just need to create new primitives that kind of incentivize both. And I think that's kind of where like maybe KPI based token distributions and whatnot come into play. Like I said, there's fun things that we can talk about, but we'll keep it very basic for now.
You want people to, well, join the platform and leave the credentials, which is a big challenge because people are lazy, basically. So, like, how do you plan to solve this problem? Do you have any, ideas already in mind? Or I guess you have, because, I've seen the alpha or maybe beta version of the platform. So, if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, so you brought up a really good point. It's like the staying power that people have on certain networks is hard to overcome. So how do you convince people to say, yeah, you know what, leave that and come to Gateway? I think right now the reason that it's not that difficult of a choice is, first of all, those platforms, like for example the incumbent ones like LinkedIn, are really just you're self-attesting most of that information. So self-attesting information is not a difficult thing, because there's not much verification or validation that's going into that info. Like I said, I can be the CEO of Goldman Sachs and no one will stop me. So the idea like that we have is, when we're building out this data protocol, what we can do to help solve like the fear that people will have in regards to leaving their current systems is being able to mirror a lot of the information from these different organizations. I think it's easier in Web3 because so much is open source. So we can, like, for example, pull people's on-chain credentials. We can go to Gitcoin and utilize their APIs to be able to pull like certain information in regards to like bounties, bounty hunters, like the compensation. You can do so with like the payment tools as well, like Parcel or Utopia Labs, that people are utilizing to pay their contributors and working with them to get like that information and making it more accessible to the overall community. But then things get really tricky when you think about data with Web2 companies. So that's kind of where like the IDs with Ceramic come in, and it's more user controlled. So the user can choose what sorts of information, or let's say platforms, they want to be able to pull data or information from, and then they can connect those platforms to a DID. So like you can actually pull from like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all these other major Web2 platforms and store like certain information on Ceramic. Like that's the end use case that they're trying to pursue. So that way, like it's no longer that you're separating your Web2 identity from your Web3. It's composable. It takes into account everything. And then the real value is creating models to not only put the ownership into the hands of the user, but also allowing the user to choose what happens with that data. If they want to monetize upon it, how those monetization models work. And for us at Gateway, some of the things that we're thinking about is around like encryption of these user tables. So that way, like if someone wanted to access Mosaic's profile on Gateway, they would have to like utilize some sort of pay some sort of a fee to be able to access the information. And then that only lasts for a certain amount of time. So there's ways for us to think about monetization from that aspect. But returning back towards your point of leaving the credentials, I think that you don't necessarily leave the credentials. It's just a matter of being able to incorporate it in a way that you can actually take advantage of those credentials.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a pretty complex technical challenge, because on one hand, you need to scrape all this data, but on the other hand, you need to encrypt it. And on the third hand, you need to let user take control of it. And there are different data formats and so on. So what has been the biggest technical challenges so far? And also, dead end streets, like things that you thought might be a solution, but they haven't been a solution at all?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And there's a reason why I'm currently not the CTO, right? Because there's a lot of people way smarter than I am who are able to solve these challenges on the technical front. So I would say some of the biggest tech challenges that we've had is on creating that data model, right? It's creating like some sort of the architecture behind how the information will be not only pulled from different sources, but also displayed on Gateway, and then at the same time providing like users control over these verified credentials. It gets very complex. It's very difficult. No one's solved for it. I think there's tons of people who are looking into the space. Evan from Disco, there's Rabbit Hole, Brian from Rabbit Hole, etc. So there's tons of people who are looking into it, and I don't think that a standard has been created. In regards to how we have solved them, like I said, we haven't like nailed it down yet. But what we are doing is we're working with like our early partners, like CyberConnect, like Ceramic, and constantly engaging with them and getting their feedback on like the infrastructure that we've put together. We are also thinking about ways to first start off with like replicating or creating the models on like a more centralized server. And then from there, thinking about where decentralization is most important, right? Because the idea is like you don't need to utilize all pure like Web3 tech stack. Reality is you can also incorporate a lot of like Web2 native technologies when it's relevant. So for us, we're doing a lot of things like, let's say, for example, on AWS. And then once it makes sense or we've tested and proven it out there, then we'll move it over to like Ceramic and stuff.
You said about the way that you think might be a good solution. And what has been a dead end street? Something that you thought might be a good solution, but it turned out it didn't work out.
I think it really starts off with like the way that when we began, right? Like when you first saw what we were doing with it was, like you said, it was a Google for DAOs. Now the question has to be like, why did we choose not to go down this route? And why did we choose to go down an even more complicated route? I think it allows us to do a lot more trial and error, right? So from that perspective with Google, I think the question that we had was, where does this go next? If we're just becoming an information hub or a repository for people, is that really valuable? Because Google clearly has far more advantages in regards to creating a spider web sort of a discovery channel. CoinGecko is out there as well. So if they create like a DAOs tab, like where does that leave us? So that was like one of the dead ends that we faced early on was like, okay, let's like just refocus on purely the contributor side of things. The second piece that I think was important, or like one of the other dead ends that we faced, was in regards to soulbound NFTs. At first, we thought like, all right, yeah, everything on regards to credentials should be on chain. But then we started getting into like what I am currently thinking about, and like an article that I want to write about soon is called like the identity trilemma. So the issues around individual or contributors' ownership, security, and data availability for their work. And in that case, NFTs are actually not the best use case because they make everything publicly accessible. So now you're not really, that's no different than like having a URL and you can send that out to people. Like if I want to be able to actually control my information, these sorts of NFTs aren't the best way to do so. But instead, maybe thinking about these verified credentials associated with data tables and like creating encryption models, even though more complex, might be the more appropriate route.
NFTs as credentials are the things that come to mind whenever you think about solving this problem. But as you said, the whole delight of having a public blockchain is that it's public. So, it comes with the territory. So, I know that you've been developing this product pretty fast. Like I've seen your pace of development, and there are new features and new ideas implemented in a very quick manner. So I'm wondering, how do you organize your product workflow? Like, how do you work on your product?
Yeah, so I think I have to give kudos where kudos are due. And this is really, again, like the team that we have is just phenomenal. And we wouldn't be where we are without them. And this comes down to also Sinket, who's really taken ownership of being a product sort of CEO and leading the charge on that front and finding the right pieces. So we recently brought on also a product manager who's really helped us get into proper sprints and figuring out priorities and whatnot. So from that perspective, that helps us really organize our internal processes, especially on the product development perspective. So we have bugs that we need to address first, and then we also know what sort of features we want to implement that will add the most amount of value for our end users. And then from there, in regards to the workflow itself, it makes it a lot easier for people like me to actually go and reach out to these DAOs and start actually maintaining relationships with them. because they're so focused on the product or their own product, I should say, that you want to make sure that you're able to capture attention immediately. So once we have like these sorts of clear processes put into place, we have a clear understanding of what next steps are. It makes following up, it makes maintaining those relationships a lot easier. And I think that people are more willing to do so because they see that you're courteous of their time as well as being more mature in regards to your prioritizations and your building.
I think it's good comment about, valuing people's time because, in Web3, I feel like everyone is just running very fast, FOMO, everything is changing every day and there are so many opportunities and so on and so forth. And being able to like whenever you have someone's attention, so really give him the beef that he's looking for is super important because as far as I understand, even though you are responsible for de facto like business development, you act as a also product manager, at least in some way, because you collect their feedback and you ask them about their needs. So, in a traditional company, whenever you have someone who's responsible for business development, they just, they don't, well, they listen to the clients, but not in such a deep manner. But, here, as you are co-building this product with them, it seems that it's the only way to do it.
Yeah, I think early stage business development kind of has to be product oriented, right? So like once you actually have a sales product market fit established, then it's kind of easier just to put it out there and you go from customer. But I think right now what we need to do is like really hone in on like what is it that we're actually building. So business development kind of gets interesting where it's like multiple different hats as opposed to like focusing on one specific role. And I think that's also just the nature of startups. Like I don't think a startup that has 5 to 10 people doing one specific task is all that efficient because there's going to be significant overlap. And the overlap will occur until you actually find product market fit. It's just that you have to triage, right? It's not going to be me who's going to plan out the sprints, but I will get the feedback from the consumers, from the clients, and being able to like relay that to my product team, right? And then my product manager will also be able to like take that feedback and then prioritize what needs to be done. So what we have, and I'm really appreciative for this, is like clear handoff processes. We have an understanding about like what each person is working on. And then that's really important within a startup. And I think for this DAOs as well, this is like just in general, if you have that clear coordination amongst members of your community, then being able to deliver value becomes exponentially faster.
Yeah, and then, talking about the product, you cannot build a product without developers. And as far as I know, your team is growing pretty fast, despite the fact that, first of all, in Web3, it's hard to recruit people. And secondly, you haven't advertised your project so far too much. You're kind of working under the radar at this point. So how do you recruit developers?
Yeah, this is a fun question, right? And believe it or not, as much as we like to say that LinkedIn is the way to go for hiring, we're actually using Twitter, shit ton of Twitter. Oh, I don't know if I can say that, but we can use a lot of Twitter because we're just actively sending DMs to developers. There's also guilds out there like Raid Guild, or you even have developer DAOs. You also have amazing projects like Learn Web3, who I actually got to speak with like earlier this week. And they're doing a lot of great stuff to get people into the space and get them like understand about Web3 and then creating a funnel for talent, right? They're almost for lack of better terms, acting like as a recruitment agency, right? They have a pipeline of talent ready to go. So working with them has been very helpful. Working with these sorts of communities has been helpful. And the other thing is like with recruiting with devs, it's just people you know. I think that's like the thing that we touched upon earlier is like you want to make sure you're hiring people that other people can attest to as well. Right. So if I know that there's developers out there, we'll ask for our network and say, hey, look, do you have a developer that you recommend for X, Y, and Z? They'll send us over to GitHub and then we'll do the initial like scraping of their GitHub, understand like what they're capable of doing. And then from there, we just have calls and see, okay, how can they add value to us immediately? We put them on like a trial basis with our project. And like if we like the work and they like what we're doing, then we stick around and we continue to work together.
Okay, thanks for that. So we are getting till the end, Ayyan. It was very interesting to learn all these things about DAOs from you. So I would like to ask you a few traditional questions. So the first one is obviously, what has been the most mind-blowing project in the Web3 that you have seen so far?
So far is such a hard question because there's so many projects available. So let's break it down to 2022 only. And I think the project that excites me the most right now in 2022, and this is actually because I've been really a big proponent of like cross-chain versus multi-chain. I do want to see where layer zero can go, Hop Exchange as well, Snaps. That space really intrigues me. Just as someone that's like constantly interested in seeing how you can bridge these different chains. I think that the future is multi-chain. So from that perspective, that's what's most mind-blowing to me and what I'm most in anticipation for.
Okay. And, what has been the funniest thing that happened to you? You already mentioned one story, so I'm wondering if you have any other as well.
Yeah, for people who are buying NFTs, make sure that you're not just buying projects because they're being pumped by your favorite celebrities, and also look into like who's actually running them. I know it's hard when it comes down to anonymous characters, but just doing a little bit of a Twitter search or a little bit of a dig online on some of these pseudonymous characters can maybe help you get a better understanding. So that way you don't get rugged. I've been rugged before, and it's not a good feeling. So yeah, it was a funny experience in hindsight, but when I was going through it, it was absolutely painful.
I've read this one comment some time ago that when in traditional finance, the stock goes down like 80% or even, 99%, everyone wants to sue the board, there are multiple media articles about it, and everyone is so worried, like, oh my God, why have I lost my money? But in crypto, people are just shit posting and say, lol, I got wrecked, whatever. So, the thing is like the people in crypto, at least, maybe more native people than the newcomers, are kind of aware of the risks that they are taking. Obviously, it's not nice to get rug pulled or, lose everything that you invested. But, when you open the project and you see that it offers you like 10,000% annual yield, you know what you are taking part in. Like, like you are gambling. So if you like it and you get wrecked, whatever,
I like to say that if I was a boxer, Web3 has made me into someone who has a granite chin, so I would never get knocked out. And number two thing is, when it comes to Web3 and getting rugged so often, there's nothing in this world that can hurt you anymore. So those of you guys who are out there that are having relationship problems, if you've gone through the bull market or if you've gone through a bear market, just know there's no pain that can ever destroy you.
Yeah, I actually, like the last few weeks, everyone was saying, "Oh, is it the bear market?" Because everything goes down. And actually, like I looked at my portfolio and the history, and it turns out that in the last year, I already survived 3 quote unquote bear markets because it was getting like 50% or even more down, and I kind of feel like immune to that. Like I don't even check my portfolio anymore. Like I don't do it.
Yep.
I don't open it. I don't care. Like if I decided to hold it long term, I will hold it long term regardless of the daily price. So yeah, definitely like it's the best school of learning how to cope with your emotions and hard moments, and kind of detach yourself from the numbers of the screen. Like they stop defining you, because one day you have million and the other day you have like $5. So yeah, so I like it. It was super cool to have you. So I have one last question that I ask every time, and this is, whom should I invite next? Do you have any ideas for people who might be a good fit?
Yeah, I do. I think I might have a little bit of personal bias here, but maybe a VC like Faizan Khan from Visory Capital. I think he has a very different view from a lot of people in the space where they're constantly bullish. He has a more like rationalist approach and takes a lot of things into account when he's making up his thesis. So I would definitely try to say that you should reach out to Faizan Khan from Visory. The other thing that I would recommend is to like a project like for me that I'm super interested in is Layer Zero. I know that they have tons of the founders are very receptive towards people who are reaching out to them. So I highly recommend that maybe if you want to get into like the multi-chain side of things, or better yet for Layer Zero, the omni-chain world, you're trying to set something up with them. And then also something like Hop Exchange from Chris Winfrey. I had a great call with them earlier this week. So highly recommend that any of those projects really come to mind.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I will definitely reach out to Like Layer Zero, the funny thing is I joined their Discord when it was like super small. Like I don't remember, like it was very, very long time ago. I think last year. I think there was just like one post on their Discord back then.
Really?
I mean, like in this announcement section. Obviously, not like the whole Discord, but it was super early. I found them like during some night scrolling on Twitter, and and I was like, oh, maybe I can invest in them because I like the idea, but it turns out that I couldn't do it back then. So yeah, and now I'm pretty worried. I wish I could invest in them somehow, but anyway, like yeah, this is the project that was on my radar for quite a long time, so I will be very happy to talk with them.
Yeah, and I'm happy to connect you with either Fazan or the Hop Exchange team as well. Just let me know. I think this is the beauty of Web3, right? You're only one relationship away from someone else.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot. So, Ayyan, have a good day and, see you on Discord, I guess.
Likewise.
And maybe Miami,
Yeah, hey man, I'm always down to party in Miami. Miami is the place to be. But quick shameless plug, guys, go ahead and follow Gateway on Twitter. Also, if you want to stay up to date on some like the content I will be producing, you can follow me at Twitter. That's at Ayyan Rahman on Twitter. You can also find our other founders and team, whatnot, and keep up to date with our project. So would love for all the support.
Yeah, and the website of Gateway is mygateway.xyz, as far as I remember.
Correct.
Okay, so if you want to learn more, definitely go there and learn, and you can join their Discord as well. It's a nice Discord channel because it's kind of small, which I like because many Discord channels are super intense and it's very hard to keep up and hard to basically make a connection with people. So on Gateway, it's nice. So if you want to hang out in some place and learn about DAOs, I think it's a very, very good place to go. So definitely check it out.
Appreciate it, Masek. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot and have a good day.
Cheers.